I would like to welcome you all to this webinar. First of all, I would like to thank the Malta University Historical Society, especially Nico Muscat, the president, for inviting me to deliver this talk on domestic violence. I must admit that this is a new thing because I normally lean towards female agency rather than victimhood, but it was a challenge that I welcomed, and I'm happy to share with you a few ideas about the past that may serve as a moment for us to reflect upon the present. So, the title that I have chosen for my presentation is A Legacy of Domestic Abuse. So here we go. We've all heard the saying, spare the rod, spoil the wife. This was well ingrained in medieval mentality in the past, and I won't hesitate to say that, unfortunately, it is still with us today. Well, where does domestic violence come from? What are the ingredients that lead to domestic violence? First of all, biological advantages. There's no doubt that, generally speaking, men are stronger than women. Another very important ingredient is patriarchal attitudes. Now, I would like to delve a little bit more deeply into patriarchal attitudes. What are patriarchal attitudes? Here we're seeing a picture of men smoking, drinking in a tavern. Well, this is part of, or shall I say, one of the ingredients of patriarchy, what I will term as attitudes towards, for instance, violence, the way we teach boys to be violent because that's the way to be a boy. So this idea of what it means to be macho. Another component, shall I say, of patriarchy is our attitude towards gender. So we traditionally expect men to go to the tavern, just like this bunch of men are doing, and to smoke and to drink and to act, you know, in a certain way. Whereas we expect women to be submissive, to be loyal, to act in a feminine way, to be obedient. You might be saying, well, this is something of the past. It's not relevant to today's day and age. Not really. I would say yes and no. There are still lingering ideas on the fact that a daughter should be submissive, loyal, obedient, and a boy should be violent, rough and tumble, etc., etc. This is cultural. This is culture. It is a culture. This culture that continues to breed this sort of gender inequality atmosphere. So this might look a little bit funny because this is the way ancient Greeks trained boys to be macho by carrying bulls. Well, nowadays we don't really see males carrying bulls around, but we certainly see a lot of muscle. Here we are in the 4th century, so I'm really going back to the roots, trying to dig out what encouraged, what promoted domestic violence and violence against women. Well, definitely I would say that the church did not help the church did not help. Here we're looking at Saint Augustine of Hippo, one of the 4 great fathers of the Latin Church, and this is the 4th century, and this is what he wrote. He wrote that a woman does not possess the image of God in herself, but only when taken together with the male who is her head. As far as the man is concerned, he is by himself alone the image of God. So already here we have the first holy fathers of the church instilling in society this idea that males are the image of God, whereas females are not. Another idea that came out of the church, came out of religions that promoted male superiority over females is this story of Adam and Eve that fired the imagination of medieval theologists and continues to, I would say, be used as a story to confirm the fact that women are evil. So here we're looking at a sarcophagus, which is displayed in the Vatican Museum. It dates to the 4th century. And here we're seeing a relief with Eve. This is probably one of the earliest representations of Eve. And she's standing by the tree that bears forbidden fruit. And of course, the snake representing evil, representing the devil, is attached to her left hand. Well, church view, as I was saying, did not help women. The story of Adam and Eve was certainly a story that put the blame of sin on fairly and squarely on Eve's shoulder, and of course the daughters of Eve being us, women. This idea of Eve sort of being the one to blame for us being chased out of the Garden of Eden and made to suffer actually encouraged men to punish women. The idea of Adam and Eve and the story inspired many artists not far from us, in Sicily, close by, in Monreale. There are beautiful mosaics, and one of them actually depicts the story of Adam and Eve right here, not far from Monreale in Palermo, in the Palatine Chapel. One can see a similar image, but images of the story of the Garden of Eden and the forbidden fruit that Eve ate from the tree and shared with Adam is indeed a story that one finds in many churches in the Western world. However, I would also like to add that this is a story that that the Jews also use and that Muslims use as well. It's a story that is present in different religions. So now we're looking at another theologian, another, I would say, great mind. We're talking about the 13th century, of course, when, as I was saying, the iconography of Adam and Eve was in vogue. And St. Thomas Aquinas said, well, woman is a deformed man. Thus, she is deficient in bodily complexion and also in reason. So we see how in the 13th century, more or less what Saint Augustine had said in the 4th century was still happening, still the way church men were thinking. We have here another religious man who was a bishop, and his name is Giacomo da Varese, and just saying that we're deformed and females are basically not in the image of God, but he's also saying if she cannot learn to blush with fear of God, let her grow red with the switch, which would be the whip. So you had in medieval times actually religious men who were highly respected, who inspired people, who were encouraging violence against women. And of course, this was a very common occurrence in medieval society. Women were regularly beaten up by males. Did anyone protest? Did anyone try to stop this? Yes, yes. This is a small voice, I would say, but certainly an important voice. We're looking at a picture of Christine de Pisan, and she was a noble woman, and she did accuse men cruel towards their wives and beating them up. She fought for women's rights, for better education for women and fair treatment in marriages. She wrote 2 books in 1405. The first one is called The Ladies' City, La Cité des Dames, and its sequel, which was The Treasure of the City of Ladies. So yes, there were women who tried to do something to improve the situation and tried to resist this injustice towards women. And this is a lovely letter that she wrote. I remind you that this was written at the end of the 14th century. They neither kill nor wound, nor lop off limbs. They do not plot or plunder or persecute. They set no fires, nor disinherit others. They poison no one, steal no gold, nor silver, nor deceive in order to gain an inheritance, nor falsify contracts, nor cause the slightest harm to the kingdom, the duchy, or the empire. No evil follows the deeds of even the worst of them, and if there is one such judgment, cannot be given or rules laid down from this exception. So, a voice of the past. We move on. I mean, we were talking about women being beaten, normally by their husband or male relatives, fathers beating their daughters. That was very common, and it's still, I would say, the most common form of domestic violence today. But you have another very important form of violence, which is rape. And here I'm showing you a self-portrait, actually, of Artemisia Gentileschi, who in the 17th century was raped. She was the daughter of Orazio Gentileschi, and she learned how to paint. She was a very, very talented artist. She's the female Caravaggio, so to say. Well, she was raped at the age of 17. She faced humiliation and slender. Her paintings, which are remarkable paintings, feature women from myths, allegories, and the Bible, and they largely include victims, suicides, and warriors. This is her message. I was raped. I may have been a victim. I may have considered suicide, but I'm a warrior. I fought it, and she I would say, came out in all her strength, her talent shines through right up to this very day. Here we're seeing one of her very beautiful paintings, described as being more savage than Caravaggio. And I like to quote a sentence which she said about one of her paintings, not this one, she was actually referring to another one, but she said, "You will find the spirit of Caesar in the soul of a woman." And she was probably referring to herself, having passed through so much suffering, and yet she had the spirit of Caesar in her. Well, here is a drawing, a picture of one of the most notorious things that ever happened, I would say, against women, which is the burning of witches at the stake. Women were accused of being witches quite unjustly, and I would say thousands were killed because they were accused of being witches. Many a time there was no truth in that, but this was the cause of great violence against women. Women were burnt at the stake, they were hanged, they were stoned to death. So let us not forget. So we come now to another voice. We've heard the voice of Saint Augustine, of Saint Thomas of Aquinas. Did they all support the theory that a woman is there to be controlled by men because she's not in the image of God? Well, no, not everybody. I would say it was the dominant voice, but it was not the voice of all religious men. You had, for instance, this Jesuit in the 16th century, Gaspar, Astete, said the treatment to which husbands subjected their wives exceeded the accepted limits of violence. He described it as being low and unchristian. So it wasn't only a noble woman who expressed this in the 15th century, but you had also in the 16th century religious men who voiced their objection to what was happening. Well, let's come to Malta now. We've spoken a little bit about Europe. Let's come to our little island of Malta, and we have this little chapel in Budia called Santa Maria ta' Bir Miftuħ. And in this chapel, we have this fresco painting representing the Last Judgment. And if you look carefully at this painting, you are going to see devils carrying females and throwing them into the fire. So what this is really telling us is that Malta was no different. In Malta, things were pretty much the same, with women being considered to be evil and therefore thrown into the flames of hell. This fresco dates around the 16th century. So coming down further, I decided to focus on the 18th century in particular. One, because we have a printed code of laws which enables us to at least try to figure out how whether domestic violence was ever regulated in the early modern period. Well, I'm focusing on this book of laws precisely because it represents more or less what happened earlier and what happened later. I'm talking about the Leggi e Costituzioni Prammaticali that was published in 1724 under the reign of Antonio Manoel de Vilhena. So looking through those laws, I tried to sift through those laws to understand whether there was anything in that book that penalized men who beat up women. It was very difficult, I must admit. It's very vague. Well, there were 2 chapters that, by and large, could have, in a way, been used to extract laws to punish men who were beating up their wives. The first one is the chapter 20 in this book of laws called Degli, Omicidi, Ferimenti, Armi, Proibite, Resistenza ai Ministri, Catturanti. So it's about homicide, arms, prohibited arms, resistance to the police, and fighting, wounding somebody during a fight. So under this chapter, I was checking if there's anything about women, that there's any law penalizing men who beat up their women. Well, there's this I would say paragraph which says that any civil person who offends his father, mother, or relatives through verbal insults will face 10 years military service on our galleys without remuneration. Subordinate offenders will be put on display in the public square for an entire day with an epitaph on their chest stating the type of insult they committed, and will row on a galley for 10 years without earning a single penny. So let's say a man was, a father was abusive towards his daughters or his mother or wife, and the abuse was restricted to verbal insults, then this could be applied. There is another sentence which again I extracted, which could possibly have been applicable to certain cases, and this is Delitti di genere atroci fismorium, which means basically crimes of an atrocious type. And this is explained as being poisoning, suffocating, or other types of cruelty. Well, that was also sanctioned by law. So in a way, if a man tried to suffocate or poison or be cruel, he would be penalized. In the subsequent chapter, chapter 21, entitled Dei Delitti della carne, carnal crimes, we have this sentence which says, without derogating from the penalties imposed by canonical and imperial laws against incest, rape, adultery, and other similar crimes of the flesh. And then it goes on to say that a man, a married man who is adulterous will be punished, etc., etc. But that is not what we're interested in today. Today we're talking about crimes against women, violence against women. So basically it's this sentence which really and truly is of interest to me. So I dug a bit further and I tried to find what early modern imperial law said about domestic violence. And really and truly, it is extremely vague. There's nothing which is really explicit, nothing which says if a man beats up his wife, he will row on the galleys for 10 years without earning a penny. Nothing of that. It's quite limited. Basically, all it does, all these laws do, the imperial laws, right? I'm going to be talking about the canonical in a minute. All they do is they say that he can be violent, the man can be, that he can sort of beat his wife, as long as it's not too much. So this is the whole, quite, I would say, confused trail of thought. So it limited the application of the husband's violence, while in effect condoning his right as the family patriarch to engage in violence to promote family values. And on this side, I reproduced an expression that we have in English. You've surely heard the rule of the thumb, and you might be curious where that is coming from. Well, let me tell you where that comes from. It comes from the fact that imperial law allowed husbands to beat their wives with a rod or a stick no thicker than his thumb. So that's where the rule of thumb comes from. To be honest with you, very unacceptable. They should not beat their wives, period, with a rod, a stick, or anything, whether it's the size of a thumb or bigger, is irrelevant. So what does canon law say? Well, canon law actually gave women the right to divorce or separate from their, this might come as a surprise. This might come as a surprise because nowadays you cannot divorce through the church. You only get a separation. But in those days, in the early modern period, you could actually get a divorce. So if the woman accused her husband of extreme cruelty, she could apply for a divorce or she could apply for a separation. So the first one, this one, divortium ut fedus vinculum, is divorce. And the other one, divortium ad torum emensam, is separation, is a separation. Husband and wife should live together, this is what canon law says, unless one did something severe enough to give the other legitimate cause to separate. There's an addendum to this saying emotional detachment and simple annoyances, and I wonder what simple annoyances mean, are not a basis for separation. So this is canon law. 17th century, we're at the end of the 17th century. This is a priest, a very, I would say, famous priest, he's Spanish, Father Torrecilla, and this is what he says. Giving her a few, now this is notwithstanding the fact that the church legitimized, sort of, listen, you can get a separation from this man if he's a beast, if he beats you up. But giving her a few slaps or blows with a stick is not sufficient grounds for divorce, because the husband is obliged to rule his wife and may correct and punish her if necessary, but not cruelly and severely, in such a way as to exceed the manner appropriate to such a woman according to her nobility or rusticity. Well, this is even more interesting. So if she's noble, you can't beat her. If she's a subordinate person, you can. Obviously, it's these mixed messages. It's this fact that priests insisted on saying this to people that maintained domestic violence against women. Well, we're not in Spain, we're in Zebbuj in Malta here, and we have Padre Pelagio Maria, who wrote this and said it in a sermon. So he prepared his sermon for the opening of a nunnery, and this is what he said. I've just taken an extract, obviously, from his sermon. Women by way of instinctive inclination, are inconsistent, foolish, self-conceited, vain, haughty, inconsiderate, and so reputed throughout all ages, ever since the appearance of the first woman, Eve, achieving despicable consequences upon the world. Oh my. So here we are, we're in the 18th century now, we're still talking about Eve, and we're still treating women as subordinates, fools, or... Well, following this, I went into the Libri dei Carcerati, and of course, because of time limitations, I concentrated on 1 year. Now, obviously, there would be years when this would be more, I would say sometimes maybe less, but I had to focus on 1 year, and I decided to take the year 1762. Don't ask me why it fell on 1762. It was the first thing I saw when I referred to my notes. So in 1762, from the 1st January to the 31st December, these are the cases of domestic violence that I dug up from the jail records, the Libro dei Carcerati. So the domestic violence is described in the Libro dei Carcerati, the jail records, as maltrattamenti usati alla moglie, translated in English as ill-treating the wife. Now, it just says ill-treating. I mean, I then had to try and understand what ill-treating is. Ill-treating can be anything, really and truly. So this is me, this is what I've written. I mean, I assume that ill-treatment included physical assault, violent actions such as hitting, beating, pushing, and kicking. It did not include adultery, because adultery would be described differently. So here I am presenting the cases cases of men that were jailed because of maltrattamenti, because they ill-treated their wife. This notorious man, his name was Geobatta Poggia, who was incarcerated on the 18th January 1762, released on the 30th January 1762, re-incarcerated for battering his wife, on the 13th July, released on the 5th August, re-incarcerated for battering his wife on the 18th of August. On the 10th September, he was fined. On the 23rd of November, he was fined again. And on the 27th November, he was exiled from the entire domain, put on a boat and sent away. Great. Really and truly, this gives me the impression that a man who battered his wife was given 3 chances. By the 3rd time, if you did it on the 3rd time, then you're out of the country. We just put you on a boat and off you go. There were other men who ill-treated their wife. In 1762, we have this Giuseppe Simiana, who on the 3rd June was incarcerated and then released on the 23rd June. So basically, he spent 20 days in prison. And we have Baldassare Revesa from Valletta, who ill-treated his wife Rosa. On the 8th of July, he was incarcerated, and this time he spent less days than Giuseppe Simiana because he was released on the 17th July 1762. However, there is a little bit of an explanation here saying that he was released after making peace with his wife. So he may have spent less time in jail because his wife forgave him. On the 19th August, we have Francesco Psaila, who also ill-treated his wife. And basically on the 20th August, he was released. So he only spent 1 day in jail, and he was obliged to live with his wife. So this gives me the impression that he was sleeping around, maybe. Giuseppe Schembri was a soldier, and he too ill-treated his wife, Caterina Schembri. On the 1st of October, he was exiled from the entire domain, and then on the 6th, the exile actually took place. So we have another case here of, in all, basically in 1762, 6 men were incarcerated for ill-treating their wives. We had also cases of caning, beating up a woman with a cane. In the Libro dei Carcerati, this is described as bastonate. So on the 21st May 1762, we have Giuseppe Camilleri, an auxiliary shipyard porter, bastazo. That's the way it is. That's the way it is described in the book. Incarcerated for beating his wife with a cane. He was released on the 8th June. Ad interesse di sua moglie. Again, because it was in his wife's interest to be released. We do not, obviously the book does not say in what way this could have been of interest to his wife. On the 22nd July 1762, we have a certain Ferdinando Gadineo from Vittoriosa, who was incarcerated for beating up a prostitute with a cane on a boat and on land. And on the 31st of October, we have a certain Andrea Attard from Zeytun, who was incarcerated for beating a young woman with a cane. He was released on the 15th November, so he spent 2 weeks in jail. So here we're getting a picture of what used to happen to men who beat up women, who were violent towards women in 1762. Well, we had six cases of maltrattamenti, we had 3 cases of caning, and in 1762 there was 1 case of rape, and this was committed by Gio Grisci Calafato from Senglea, who was accused of raping and impregnating Francesca Farrugia. He was, I would say, a particular type of man who thought he would get away with anything. On the 8th January, he was released with a pledge, which is likely to have been a promise of marriage. On the 14th January 1763, he was released from prison through a special grace issued by the judge, of course. And on the 10th July, he was reincarcerated for not honoring his promise. So he was probably forced to marry her, and he said he would, but he didn't. But there was just this single case of rape. Rape, domestic violence, and beating up women are not the only types of violence against women that we see in the 18th century. There was also psychological abuse. For instance, there's a story of Caterina Desira. This story is a story that I found in the processi, the trials, in the archives in Rabat. And basically, she went to court saying that her husband, for the last 11 years, was beating her up, but he was not only beating her up, he was bringing women to their house and sleeping with them in their bed. He was not helping her to feed the children. And we hear a voice of a woman who for 11 years bore the suffering of a man who did not respect her, who did not love her, who treated her badly, and who definitely was abusing her psychologically. We have another voice from the past. This is 1795, a very similar story by a certain Anna who is just referred to as Anna, a woman without a surname. So let us not forget that there were also cases of psychological abuse. Another, I mean, we normally talk about husbands beating up their wives, or maybe a husband beating up his daughter. But we also have cases of, there are also cases which I came across during my research of sons beating up their mothers. In one particular case, he was actually a kind of policeman, shall I say. They were called Ministri di Cattura. But this person who was sort of a person who should in reality be defending people was actually a notorious person who used to beat up his mother. Another form of violence, I mean, we normally talk about male violence against women, but let us not forget that there is also intra-female domestic violence, where you have women hitting women. It could be a mother hitting her daughter, it could be a daughter hitting her mother. That's a form of domestic abuse as well. And I have this story with which I will end that happened on the 6th June 1731, where a certain veneranda Azzopard from Bormla was assaulted by neighbors. Her neighbors were Evangelista Tanigret and Rosa Tacaroli and Paulica, because she was blamed for a miscarriage that Evangelista and Rosa's unmarried sister had suffered. So, I mean, how can a person cause a miscarriage? Well, anyway, the story is that they said that Veneranda had attacked their sister and caused her to miscarry. But in the trial, Veneranda said that she had not even seen their sister, let alone touch her. But she was beaten up pretty badly. So to tie up what I've been talking about, I probably exceeded my 30 minutes. Environments on which violence towards women thrives, patriarchal attitudes, sometimes ordained by the gods, supported by the priests and implemented by law. But then there's also social isolation, economically disadvantaged communities, weak family ties, and tight living conditions, which may provide fertile ground for violence against women. I will end with this sentence, which I quote from a professor in philosophy, Michelle Boulos-Walker. She says, silence is a spoken yet unheard voice that is structured by a logic of repression. Some of the women I spoke about, who in 1762 went to the courts and accused their men of being violent towards them, they might not have got what they wanted or the protection that they needed, but not talking about it is even worse. And that makes me think about how many women in 1762 suffered in silence. So silence is not an option. You have to speak to be heard, and there is help out there. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to my next webinar with MUHS. Thank you very much.